You wake up and the ground is already moving. Not violently, not yet. A soft tremor, the kind that makes the water in a clay jar ripple once and go still. You have felt it before. Everyone in this settlement has. You grow up here learning to read the island the way a sailor reads current, with your feet, with your spine, with the part of your body that doesn't have a name but knows before your mind does. You press your palm against the wall. The stone is warm. It is always warm here. The island breathes heat from below, and that warmth used to feel like a blessing. You are in Akrotiri. It is the late 17th century before anything you would recognize as modern time. The sea outside your door is deep blue, almost violet in the early morning light. The smell coming off the water is brine and pumice, and something sulfurous that you have stopped noticing. Your house is built from cut stone and plaster, 2 stories, with storage jars sunk into the floor below, and a wooden upper room where you sleep on a mat woven from reeds. The walls are painted. Yours are painted with reeds and water, and the shapes of birds. Other houses have ships, dolphins, young men crowned with lilies. You live inside color. You live inside a world that knows how to make beauty out of volcanic rock. Outside, the streets are narrow and deliberately so. Houses share walls for structural support. The settlement is dense, planned, layered. Water runs through pipes beneath the ground. Waste flows away from living spaces. This is not a village. This is an engineered community, built over generations by people who understood that surviving on an island this volatile required precision, not improvisation. The jars in the storeroom below hold oil, grain, dried fish, wine. Some are as tall as your chest. They are the only insurance that exists in this world. And this morning, when you check them before the day begins, you notice that one has cracked along the base. The tremor from 3 days ago. A hairline fracture, still slow, but by midday it will be worse. You do not say anything to anyone, not yet, because acknowledging it means deciding what it means. And the thing about living on this island is that the earth has always shaken here. The question is never whether it will shake. The question is always what this particular shaking is trying to tell you. Thera worked. It was beautiful, prosperous, connected, and it was built on a caldera, a collapsed volcanic crater that had been filling with pressure for centuries. Every wall, every pipe, every painted room existed on top of something that was always preparing to end it. You belong to a system older than the buildings you live in. The Minoan world is not an empire in the way that word will later be used. There is no single king commanding obedience from a throne backed by an army. Power here moves through palace centers on Crete, at Knossos, at Phaistos, at Malea, and from those centers it radiates outward along sea routes to places like Thera. You are connected to that system through trade, through tribute, through the flow of goods that keeps the entire Aegean network alive. Olive oil moves west, copper moves south. Tin arrives from distant coasts no one on Thera has ever seen. The palace records the transactions on clay tablets in a script that only administrators can read. You are a craftsman, a fisherman, a merchant's assistant, a farmer of barley on terraced slopes above the town. Your position in this system is determined by what you produce and what you owe. You owe labor during planting season. You owe a portion of your catch to the storage network that redistributes food across the island. You owe respect to the ritual calendar managed by priests whose authority comes from their ability to read signs. Signs in the sky, signs in the earth, signs in the behavior of animals before a storm. You do not question this system, not because you are naive, because it works, because without it, a volcanic island with no river, no deep soil, and no hinterland produces nothing alone. You cannot survive here alone. No one can. The entire settlement of Akrotiri survives as a unit or does not survive at all. The walls are shared, the pipes are shared. The grain in the palace storeroom feeds everyone when a family's reserves fail. In exchange, you contribute. Every day, what you contribute is the minimum price of continued membership in a civilization that has so far kept you alive. Now that you understand where you stand, the next question becomes obvious. What does this world cost your body every single day? The work here does not stop. Thera is not an agricultural island in the way Crete is. The soil is thin. The slopes are steep. Farming on terraced volcanic rock means carrying water by hand when the cisterns are low, hauling soil amendments up paths cut into the hillside, planting in ground that drains fast and dries hard. A barley crop on Thera is not a given. It is a negotiation with terrain. Vines produce better than grain here, and the wine that comes from them is valuable in trade. But you cannot eat wine. You cannot feed a child on amphorae destined for Crete. The fishing is constant. Men go out before dawn in small wooden boats, reading the surface of the water the way the priests read ritual signs. The sea around Thera is deep and cold in the trenches, and warm at the surface, and the fish move with the seasons and with the volcanic heat rising from underwater vents. Some days the nets come back full. Some days the sea is wrong in ways that experienced fishermen cannot fully explain. The fish gone, the water discolored, a faint smell of sulfur rising from depths where there should be none. Archaeologists who excavated Akrotiri found the bones of tuna, mackerel, sea bream. They also found grinding stones worn down to almost nothing, which means grain was processed daily in volume by people whose wrists and shoulders bore the mechanical record of that labor. Your body is the infrastructure of this civilization. There is no machine, there is only the repeat motion, the early morning, the weight that does not disappear. Even when the sea is good and the terraces hold, something else is waiting. The storage system is everything, and it is the first thing the Earth can destroy. Akrotiri's economy runs on accumulated surplus. The great jars in the storerooms below every house and in the central storage areas of the settlement's administrative core represent years of production compressed into clay and sealed. Olive oil does not expire quickly. Dried fish lasts through a winter. Grain stored correctly holds for a season or two. This is not wealth in the modern sense. This is the physical buffer between a community and starvation. When the tremors begin, and in the months before the great eruption the ground shakes repeatedly, those jars crack. Not all at once. A fracture here. A toppled storage rack there. Oil bleeds into the earth floor. Grain gets damp and begins to mold in storage rooms, whose walls have shifted a fraction of a centimeter, just enough to let in moisture that was not there before. The community knows this. Redistribution begins. Families that still have intact stores begin feeding families that do not. This is how Minoan social organization handles shortage, through the palace network's redistribution logic, replicated at the household level. But redistribution has limits. When enough families lose enough stock, the buffer disappears. A community that normally had one full season of reserves in storage suddenly has weeks. You do not feel hunger yet, but the calculation has changed. And everyone in Akrotiri can read that change in the way people look at jars before they open them. The earth moves and the body pays. Before the great eruption, the tremors are intermittent but cumulative. Buildings crack along the stress lines that engineering cannot fully prevent. Roofs shift. Stairways develop gaps, plaster falls, and with the dust comes something older than architecture, the body's own reaction to chronic low-level threat. Sleep becomes irregular. Infants who sense their parents' tension before they had words for it begin to refuse food. The elderly, whose bones already hold the compressed record of decades of labor, feel the additional shock in joints that stopped repairing themselves years ago. Volcanic exposure has additional costs that no one in Akrotiri has a framework to understand. The fumarolic gases seeping through ground fissures, sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, are invisible and odorless at low concentrations. They accumulate in low-lying areas, in the ground floors of houses built into hillsides, in the storage spaces where people spend hours each day. Physical examination of skeletal remains from sites exposed to prolonged low-level volcanic activity shows patterns of respiratory stress, thickened bone tissue in the chest cavity, evidence of chronic inflammation that people would have experienced as persistent cough, fatigue, and a heaviness in the chest that no amount of sleep relieved. You are tired in a way that rest does not fix. The older people in the settlement have names for this tiredness. They say the island is breathing badly. They are more correct than they know. But the body is the last thing anyone talks about. There is too much else to manage. And then there is something that no one in Akrotiri would have named as a danger. Not because they were careless, because the danger was built into the very thing that made their lives livable, the painted rooms. Minoan wall painting is one of the most visually sophisticated artistic traditions of the ancient world. The colors are vivid, deep saffron yellow, cobalt blue, the particular red of ochre mixed with volcanic mineral compounds. These pigments were ground and applied wet onto fresh plaster, and the chemicals that produced the most durable, most brilliant colors were the same chemicals that, over years of grinding, mixing, and applying in enclosed spaces, accumulated in the bodies of the craftsmen who made them. Lead compounds appear in certain pigments used in Bronze Age Mediterranean painting traditions. Manganese dioxide, used to produce blacks and deep purples, is a neurotoxin at sustained exposure levels. The craftsmen who painted the houses of Akrotiri and their families, who lived in those houses while the paint dried, who breathed the dried particulate when walls cracked and plaster was reapplied, were receiving chronic low-level exposure to substances that degraded cognitive function, caused joint pain, produced persistent neurological symptoms that looked to everyone around them like fatigue or age. There was no conspiracy here. No one was poisoning anyone. The people who ground the pigments were the same people who made the rooms beautiful. The rooms were made beautiful because beauty was part of how Minoan civilization processed its relationship to an unpredictable world. The paintings were cosmological, ritual, a daily affirmation of continuity. You made the island survivable by making it meaningful. The cost of that meaning was invisible, cumulative, and written in the bodies of the people who produced it. You do not legislate against beauty. You legislate against what you can see. The priests interpret the tremors. That is their function and their power. In a world without seismology, without geology as a discipline, without any framework that separates the physical from the sacred, the behavior of the earth is religious data. Every significant tremor produces an interpretive crisis. What does this mean? What has the community done or failed to do? What must be offered? What must change? The priests are the specialists who answer these questions. Their authority is not separate from the palace administrative system. In Minoan civilization, religion and governance share the same infrastructure, the same storage economy, the same network of redistribution and obligation. When the tremors intensify, the priests do not lose authority. They become more essential. The ritual calendar accelerates, offerings increase, the requirements placed on the community multiply at precisely the moment when the community's resources are most depleted. You are required to contribute more when you have less, because the logic of the system says that the Earth's anger is evidence of insufficient devotion, not evidence of geological inevitability. This is not cruelty. It is the only framework available. But the effect is that the most vulnerable people in Akrotiri, those who have already lost storage, those whose bodies are already compromised, those whose boats came back empty 3 times this season, bear the heaviest ritual burden at the worst possible moment. The system distributes crisis costs the way all systems do, downward. Women carry an additional weight that the painted walls do not record. Minoan iconography shows women prominently, in procession, in ritual, in the elaborate dress of palace society. This visibility is real. Minoan women held ritual roles, managed household economies, appeared in public in ways that later Bronze Age and Iron Age Mediterranean societies would restrict. But visibility in ritual is not the same as protection from the structural logic of survival under pressure. When food becomes scarce, the bodies that produce other bodies are managed. Pregnancy during food shortage is a negotiation between survival and continuation that falls entirely on the woman carrying the child. Miscarriage rates rise under chronic stress and nutritional deficit. The evidence is not written. No administrative record catalogues these losses, but the biological logic is documented in populations under comparable stress across other periods. Women who managed household stores made the daily calculations about who ate how much. In a system where the household unit was the primary economic cell and the woman managed that cell's resources, the labor of careful distribution was invisible and constant. The decision to eat less so that a child could eat more is not a decision that leaves an archaeological trace. It leaves only the body, smaller, denser, wearing down faster than the records suggest it should. The ground shakes again, You already know what it costs you. The question now is whether the cost will stop here. The great collapse does not come in one moment. It comes in sequence. First, the storage network fails, not everywhere at once. In the households whose jars cracked earliest, whose reserves were thinnest, whose redistribution access was most limited, those families begin to leave. Not dramatically. They pack what they can carry. They take their bronze tools, their jewelry, their portable wealth. They leave through the port, on boats, toward Crete or other Cycladic islands where the ground is not shaking. Archaeologists found no bodies in Akrotiri. They also found almost no portable valuables. The absence tells the whole story. Then the administrative functions begin to compress. Redistribution requires administrators. Administrators require a community large enough to justify the infrastructure. As families leave, the network that kept the remaining families alive begins to lose its critical mass. The people who operated the water pipes, who maintained the cisterns, who managed the grain accounting, they are also people. They also have families. They are also calculating. The priests interpret the departures. The departures are themselves a sign, they say, of faithlessness, of misreading, of insufficient commitment to the sacred obligations of the community. But interpretation has a threshold. Past a certain point, the number of people willing to stay and listen collapses faster than the buildings. The earth is not interested in what anyone believes about it, and still, people read the signs correctly. The most important fact about Akrotiri is that no one died there. In a Bronze Age settlement struck by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the last 10,000 years, the population evacuated before the mountain erupted. This did not happen by miracle. It happened because the community had developed, over generations, a system for reading geological warning and converting that reading into collective action. The priests who interpreted tremors as religious data were also functionally the first seismological monitoring system in the Aegean, their records of which tremors were small and which were escalating. Their knowledge of what the island's behavior looked like before previous eruptions, their authority to call a collective response, all of this operated as institutional memory. It was imperfect. It was wrapped in ritual language. But it worked. People carried what mattered and left in time. They moved through a maritime network that existed precisely because Minoan civilization had always understood that no single island was sufficient. The same trade routes that distributed olive oil and bronze in peacetime distributed refugees in crisis. The same boats that carried surplus carried people. The resistance here was not heroic. No one stood on the shore and refused to yield. The resistance was quieter than that. It was the accumulated decision over decades to build storage deep enough to last, to maintain boats capable of a crossing, to keep elders whose memory reached back far enough to recognize what escalating tremors meant. Survival in Akrotiri was not a response to the eruption. It was the consequence of a civilization that had been preparing for exactly this, without knowing it, for its entire existence. When we imagine the Minoans, we imagine the paintings, the dolphins, the lilies, the blue dark sea, and the elegant figures moving through bright rooms. We imagine a civilization comfortable in its beauty, confident in its permanence. That image is not wrong, it is incomplete. The Minoan world was sophisticated because it had to be. Every system, the storage network, the maritime routes, the ritual calendar, the administrative infrastructure, existed because the physical environment demanded precision or punished the lack of it. The painted rooms were not decoration. They were meaning-making technology in a world that needed meaning to function. The beauty was the system. The system was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. The people of Akrotiri survived the earthquake on Thera not because the gods protected them and not because they were exceptionally courageous. They survived because they lived inside a civilization that had embedded the knowledge of their own fragility into everything they built. The warning signs were real. The departure was organized. The boats were ready. What the eruption destroyed was the architecture, the paintings, the jars. What it could not destroy was the knowledge those people carried with them when they left. That knowledge, how to read a volatile island, how to maintain a network that distributes survival, how to build beauty inside a system that might end tomorrow, That is what a civilization actually is. If you had been living in Akrotiri in 1600 BC, what do you think you would have taken with you when you left? What would have been worth carrying? If this reconstruction made you think about what it actually costs to survive inside a civilization rather than just benefit from one, subscribe. There is more to examine. The next world we enter may be quieter than Thera. That does not mean it was safer.